All right, here I want to demonstrate how you change gears on Red Menace. Red Menace is a one-of-a-kind unicycle. It's got this jack shaft here. Power goes from the crank up to the jack shaft and then along this separate set of chains down to the wheel. And by switching out these sprockets, you can get pretty much any gear ratio you want, from below 1 to 1 all the way up to 1.96 to 1. So this thing can pretty much go as fast as you want. The downside is that changing gears does take a few minutes with a few different tools. But we're going to go through the process and you'll see it's not really too bad. So we start by taking some of the tension off of this chain by loosening up these two lifters, as I call them. So I've got my little socket set here. And this one's a 10 mil socket. For some reason, the other one uses an 11 mil socket. So why not? Okay, and then we can just finger loosen those a bit. And then this is the one that actually does all the holding. So we need to loosen it as well. And once you do that, you can see that the chain loses all its tension. So now we can go here and use this 8mm Allen key to loosen this bolt. This is the bolt that holds on the crank, standard sort of bicycle stuff. And then we need to use a crank puller. It's another standard bicycle repair thing. Put that in there. Screw it in all the way and then screw that inner shaft down. And then once it's all the way in, you drive it down. I'm just using my trusty crescent wrench here, and that pushes down and thus lifts the crank up. We can take it off. Okay, so here is one of the sprockets that is involved in the gearing, and we'll put that aside for now. Okay, so we need to get this other set of sprockets off. So we can finish loosening this. I'm gonna use my wrench here, 15mm wrench, and then we can just push that through or reach underneath and pull it through. Pull out these two pullers. Okay, put those aside. And then there's also two spacers, one of which just fell out the bottom and one of which is right here. You'll notice that these two spacers are not actually the same thickness. And that matters because that affects the specific location of this relative to the frame. You want the thick spacer on the outside, on this side, and the thin spacer goes down here. All right, then we work the chain off of there, pull it out of the way, work the chain off of the bottom, and there we go. Okay, so there's 4 sprockets involved, one here, and 2 there. And they have to go in matched pairs. These two are the same. Right now they both have 22 teeth. And these two have to be the same. Right now they both have 22 teeth. So what you have is 20 teeth going to 22, and then 20 teeth going to 22. So it's the same number of teeth total on both chains, same length, and that makes the whole thing work. Now, the simplest way to change gear ratios is to take this one and this one, the two 22s, and swap them out for a different size. And you can put in 20, 21, 22, 24, 26, or 28. That gives you 6 different gear ratios ranging from 1.0 to 1 to 1.96 to 1. And you don't have to go and muck about with this sprocket, which is much harder to get to, and I'm not going to demonstrate that today. So that's the disassembly, and let's just pretend that we switched these out and put, let's say, some 24 sprocket ones on there, and then we're now going to put it back together. So we know that we have to have this one, the big one on the bottom, the 22, to match with the 20. So we'll put that in, and the first step is to get this chain back on, and that's just a matter of fussing around and pulling and worrying it around until it gets on. Okay, so there we go. The next step is we get this bolt, which is also the jackshaft axle, and then we put this on top of it, and it goes along and then curves inwards. So that's facing the correct way, and then we put the spacer on. Now the thing is, these two things, the puller and the spacer, have to be above this piece of metal on the frame, and the nut has to be on the other side. So what I do is I push it over like this, and see I'm just lifting them up and slide it in there. And then I need to let the axle slide down so I can push this whole thing in. And looking down from above, you can't really see this, you can't see this at all. I can see where the gap is, I can see where the hole is, and I can push that and there, it comes through nicely. Okay, so that's half of it. Okay, so the next step is we have to get this top chain past the axle. You have to do that before pushing the axle all the way through, or else it's going to block it. And sometimes what I'll do is use one of these Allen keys to kind of push and pull things in places that I can't reach. This is sometimes the most annoying part of the whole thing. I mean, we're past it now, so that's good. There we go. It is honestly usually not that difficult. And we can put that on now, it's not actually critical. The main thing is we've got it past the axle. We can then just push that axle down. And then we grab the spacer. This is the bigger of the two spacers. And again, I'm going to use my trusty Allen key to move it along. Okay, I dropped it. I'll use my smaller trusty Allen key to move it along. And then I'm basically just trying to get it in the right spot so I can push the axle up through it. So that worked. And then I've got the puller. So same thing, slide that through. See what I did? I let the axle, the second axle, drop down too much, so that spacer just fell out. Yeah, the trick is to keep the axle pushed up just the right amount, so it's holding the piece that you're working on in place while not stopping the next piece from sliding into place. And again, it points down towards the center. Okay, and this bottom chain is in the way, which is stopping this from going down, which then stops this from going along. There we go. And we just need to loosen that. And just kind of worry it through there. Okay. And you'll see that's not sticking out very much, and that's because the head of the nut is notched. And if we just turn that, then it fits on quite nicely. Okay. Then we put this bolt on. Coming along. We're almost done. Okay, you've got to, of course, make sure that the crank lines up. You also have to get it on here first. So sometimes you have to kind of move it along a couple of notches. It's not that hard, really. Okay. Now we just use these lifters, tighten them up, and that is pulling the chains tight. And how tight you want them is a matter of preference, really. I tend to like them fairly tight. There's a bit more friction, but less backlash. So that's a good thing, I think. Use my trusty socket set here. Oh, looks like I got the 11 mil on the top this time. Doesn't really matter, they're interchangeable. So that's pretty tight. Switch the 10 mil. And then you can give it a quick turn. Seems to be fine. And then the important thing is to tighten up this bolt. Those pullers are not strong enough to withstand all the forces that can be exerted when you're using this unicycle. So you really need to tighten this up and get enough friction to hold things in place. It can handle a lot of tightening without it being a problem. And our last step, tighten that up. Tight enough so it doesn't come off. I think you're supposed to use the torque wrench for this step, but I don't. All right, we're done. And here are all the different parts that come with Red Menace. So there's a secondary jackshaft, or whatever this part is called, with 2 sprockets on it, and then a whole decent set of different sprockets, so you can get a lot of different gear ratios. And these are pretty standard parts, so you can get more of them if you want. I also have all the tools here that were used. These are parts again. These are the parts used for removing the crank, so the 8mm Allen wrench, crank puller, and crescent wrench. Here we have the parts used for removing the lifters, the 10 and 11mm sockets. This is a 5mm Allen wrench, and this is really important for tightening up these. And you should take this with you when you're riding, because these do sometimes come loose and that can cause a lot of damage. And here's the 15mm wrench for loosening up the jackshaft axle. All right, that's it for the tools.